collective throats for many years. That Augustine himself was a concordist is evident over all his writings. One place in particular is Augustine's treatment of the firmament in Genesis 1, verses 6 to 9. He writes, quote, "With this reasoning, some of our scholars attack the position of those who refuse to believe that there are waters above the heavens. Thus, they would compel the disbeliever to admit that water is there, not in a vapor state, but in the form of ice. But whatever the nature of that water and whatever the matter of its being there, we must not doubt that it does exist in that place. The authority of Scripture in this matter is greater than all human ingenuity." Unquote. We see here a firm resolve to give primary place to the literal and plain meaning of the biblical text, regardless of the controversies that were swirling in the scientific community. When Augustine departs from the literal interpretation, it is not because he has found a scientific theory that he regards as true and thus compels him to create a different biblical interpretation. For nowhere in his writings does he ever claim such as his motivation. Rather, Augustine employs a semi-literal or even allegorical interpretation in certain places only when he sees an apparent conflict within the Bible itself, a conflict that his intellect is not able to answer, at least at that particular time. By the same token, if Augustine had known the science, he would have been in a much better position to be a strict concordist of all of Genesis 1. For example, Augustine didn't know that radiation does not need a luminous body to exist, as is proven by the discovery of the cosmic microwave background radiation in the 1940s by astronomer Grote Reber, and later confirmed by Penzias and Wilson in 1963. And therefore, scientifically speaking, there need not be a contradiction between day 1 and day 4 of Genesis 1. Augustine did not know that, as discovered by physicist Paul Dirac in 1928 and confirmed by Carl Anderson in 1932, that outer space is saturated with a dense concentration of atomic particles. Or, as no less a scientific luminary as Stephen Hawking has admitted, space is filled with infinitesimal particles in the Planck dimensions. According to Scripture's description of the firmament as a hard and dense yet very penetrable material, we thus have viable candidates for its scientific basis. And though in many instances Augustine was a superior exegete of Scripture, he didn't know Greek well enough to figure out that the sole verse in the Greek Septuagint, upon which he based his fundamental conclusion that God made all things instantaneously instead of over 6 days, was based on an erroneous translation in his Latin Vulgate of Sirach 18, verse 1, and which actually means just the opposite of what he proposed in his concept of an instantaneous creation. Jerome's Vulgate was certainly a good translation, but it was not infallible, and Jerome never claimed it to be. And likewise, Augustine didn't know and wouldn't be able to know for at least the next 1,200 years that small organisms are not spontaneously generated from inorganic matter. And thus there was no seminal principles inherent in dead animal carcasses that automatically produce new life forms. As God told Daniel in Daniel 12, verse 4, quote, "Knowledge will increase," unquote.